My son stole my dead mother's necklace to pay for a lad's trip to Vegas. Before you judge him or me, ask yourself this. If your own child stole the last thing you had of your mom, would you call the police? Or would you do what I did and quietly turn it into a weapon? And if you like this kind of messy, real-life revenge, you might as well stay with me. It only gets darker from here. It started on a Tuesday morning that already felt thin and gray. I was halfway through making tea before work when something in my chest twitched, like I'd forgotten to lock a door. I went into my bedroom, opened the top drawer of the little pine chest, and lifted the old jewelry box. The lid was light, too light. I knew before I opened it. You know that cold, heavy certainty. I flipped the lid back anyway. Cheap bangles, a broken watch, a couple of stud earrings that had lost their partners. But the velvet pad in the middle, where the necklace always lay, was empty. My throat closed. No, I said, out loud, to no one. It wasn't an expensive piece to anyone else. Just a slender gold chain and a small oval locket, scratched from years of wear. But it had been around my mother's neck when we buried her. And then around mine every important day since. She'd pressed it into my hand on her hospital bed and whispered, "Keep this safe. It's more important than you know." I just thought she meant grief. "Danny," I called, voice already sharp. He was in the kitchen, shoveling cereal. Phone flat on the table, streaming some obnoxious TikTok. 28 years old and still eating like a teenager who's just come in from PE. "Yeah," he said, mouth full. "Where is it I didn't sit down?" I stayed in the doorway so he had to look at me. He blinked. "Where's what?" "My mother's necklace." My fingers were digging crescents into the doorframe. "The locket, it's gone." There was this tiny pause, barely a second, but enough. His eyes flicked to the side, to the fruit bowl where he kept his keys, then back. "You're sure you didn't move it?" he tried. "You do that sometimes. Mum, you put things somewhere safe and—" "Danny," my voice came out flat. "Where is it?" He sigh-laughed. That horrible little sound that's half child, half man trying to bluff his way through a bad hand. "All right, don't go nuclear. I borrowed it." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my gums. "You what?" "I pawned it," he said quickly. Hands up, as if that made it better. "Just for a bit, I'm getting it back after the trip. It's not like you ever wear it. If you've ever had someone take something sacred and talk about it like it's a spare mug, you know what that moment feels like." My ears rang. "For a trip," I repeated, "to bloody Vegas. It's an investment," he said, as if he'd rehearsed it. "Me and Tommy, we've got this system, right? We just need a bit of stake money and then we're golden. I'll buy the necklace back. I swear. You won't even notice." "Oh, I've noticed," I said. "And here's where I want to ask you. When someone shows you exactly who they are in one sentence, it's not like you ever wear it. Do you believe them? Or do you keep making excuses the way I did for years? Let me know. Because I still argue with myself about it at 3 a.m. He gave me the pawn ticket with a sulky flick, like he was doing me a favor. Murphy's Pawn, down on the high street. 300 pounds. I should have screamed. I should have thrown him out. Instead, I picked up my handbag, slipped the ticket in, and told him in a voice I hardly recognized, "You'd better hope they haven't sold it." Murphy's Pawn smelled of metal and old carpet shampoo. It was all glass cases and strip lighting, cheap watches, power tools, a sad wedding dress on a mannequin in the corner. Behind the counter, a man with thick glasses looked up as I came in. Murphy's eye held out the ticket. He checked the number, then went to a tray at the back. When he came back, the necklace was curled in his palm, like something that had been trapped in the dark too long. I almost cried with relief just seeing it. My fingers shook as I slid the notes across the counter. 300 pounds to buy back what was already mine. Nice little piece. "This," he said, turning the locket over. Vintage. Shame to pawn it. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to get it home, wipe it clean of his fingerprints. Pretend none of this had happened. Yes. Well, thank you. He frowned at the necklace, squinting. Funny. That looks like it might open. It does open, I said. It always has. But as I said it, my stomach dipped. Because actually, I'd never tried. My mother wore it closed. I wore it closed. I'd always been too reverent, too afraid of breaking it. I don't know. Some things you just don't tamper with. He fetched a little eyeglass, peering at the hinge. No. See, there's a catch here. Old clasp. Hold on. Before I could stop him, he pressed something with his thumbnail. There was a soft click, and the locket parted like a tiny metal book. Inside was a minuscule photograph, no bigger than my fingernail. A little girl in a white dress holding a doll, hair in a ribbon, staring straight at the camera with that solemn seriousness children have when they aren't sure if they're allowed to smile. She looks like you, Murphy said. My skin went cold. She didn't just look like me. It was me, 5 years old, I'd guess. Before everything went wrong, before Dad's gambling really took hold, before we started eating tinned soup 3 nights a week, in the other half of the locket, folded so tiny it might have vanished with one careless breath, was a scrap of paper. Murphy eased it out and handed it to me. Probably just old fluff. He said, it wasn't fluff, it was writing. An account number. A bank name I didn't recognize off the top of my head. And underneath, in my mother's neat, fussy hand, password Margaret Rose, 1971. My full name. My birth year. Something in my chest gave way, like a dam cracking. I'll take that, I said. Voice too loud. He handed me the paper. Suddenly wary, maybe, he felt the shift in me, too. I snapped the locket shut, slipped it over my head right there and tucked it inside my blouse. The metal warm against my skin. By the time I got back to the car, my hands were shaking so much I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sat there in the car park, rain starting to patter on the windscreen, and unfolded the paper again. Bank First, National Bank of Denver. Account number, a long string of numbers. Password, Margaret Rose, 1971. Denver, Colorado. The place my mother occasionally mentioned in these half-stories about your grandfather's silly land purchase in America. I'd always assumed it was just one of those family myths that go nowhere, like great-uncles who nearly played for Arsenal. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I Googled the bank's international number. It rang twice, 3 times. Then a bright recorded voice told me my call may be recorded for training purposes. I nearly hung up. I almost convinced myself it would be some clerk saying, "No, sorry, that account was closed years ago. You've got the wrong idea." But another voice came on, American, smooth, First National Bank of Denver. "This is Michelle. How can I help?" I think my mother had an account with you. I said, "She's passed away. I've found some details. I'm not sure if it's still active." "Sure, ma'am, I can look into that. Do you have the account number?" I read it out. My heart was hammering so hard I had to stop to swallow. "And do you have the password on file?" "Margaret Rose 1971, I said. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for me to hear keys tapping. Then, "Okay, yes, I can confirm that account is active. It's in the name of Eleanor Henderson. My mother's maiden name." I pressed my head back against the seat. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the world outside into gray smears. "Is there—" My voice came out croaky. "Is there any money in it?" Another pause. More tapping. "The current balance is $847,312.42. plus ongoing monthly deposits from mineral rights on the associated property. My vision went white at the edges. I'm sorry, could you say that again? 847,000. Stop, I whispered. It felt like being told a stranger had been living in my attic for 30 years, quietly paying my bills while I scrimped and worried over every Tesco shop. I was sitting there in my second-hand Ford, with my M&S uniform in the back, and some woman in Denver was telling me my mother had been quietly hoarding nearly $1 million in a bank I'd never heard of. "Ma'am," Michelle's voice floated down the line. "Are you all right?" "No," I said honestly. "No, I don't think I am." She was kind, in that brisk, procedural way. Explained that there were also several safe deposit boxes in my mother's name, that, as her only child, I could present my ID and a copy of the death certificate to access everything, that they'd been expecting me, in a strange way. Apparently, my mother had updated the file regularly, right up until a few months before she died. "She talked about you a lot," Michelle said. "Said you'd come when you needed it most." Needed it most. 15 years I'd been divorced, scraping by on a secretary's salary, counting pennies to afford a decent school trip for Danny, and she decided now was when I needed it most. But I'll be honest with you, beneath the shock and the hurt and the sudden vertigo of that number, something else unfurled inside me. Something slow and dangerous. A sense of possibility. Have you ever had that flicker of, oh, I am not trapped the way I thought I was? The bank itself felt like a film set when I finally flew out there. Denver was all big skies and thin air. Nothing like the drizzle and traffic of home. Mr. Davidson, the branch manager, was older than I'd expected, with a kind face and a tie that didn't quite sit straight. "You must be Margaret," he said, shaking my hand with both of his. "Eleanor talked about you every time she came in." "She never talked about this," I said, trying not to sound accusatory. "Not once." He nodded, as if he'd expected that. She was a very private woman, but she was determined, every month, like clockwork, to check on the account, the investments, the mineral rights statements, always asking whether the instructions for you were clear. He led me to a little meeting room, passed me a tissue when he saw my hands were shaking, then slid a brown envelope across the table. "From your mother," he said. "She left explicit instructions to give you this with the box keys." Inside were 2 small brass keys, cold and heavy, and 2 letters, both in my mother's handwriting. I opened the first one with a care that felt ceremonial. "My darling Margaret, if you are reading this, then you have finally opened your eyes to more than grief. I hope you forgive me for the secrecy, though you may not at first." She explained it all. My grandfather's worthless land in Colorado that turned out to sit on natural gas. The royalties that started in 1987, $2,000 a month at first, then more as prices rose. How she'd opened this account in Denver under her maiden name and funneled every spare cent into it. "I did it because of your father," she wrote. "By then he was gambling with money that was not his." Margaret. Dangerous men started sniffing around. He used the house as collateral on loans he had no chance of paying back. The natural gas money paid those men off and kept you and me alive. My throat burned as I read. "When I forced him to leave town, I let you believe he had simply abandoned us. It was easier than explaining that he had put us in danger. I am sorry for that lie, but I am not sorry for protecting you." She wrote about the tiny flat she'd chosen on purpose, so no one would ask questions. About turning down a proposal from a kind man called Harold because she didn't want to complicate the inheritance. About clipping coupons and pretending poverty, all while quietly building a future I knew nothing about. "If your father ever comes back," the letter finished, "he must never know about this money." Men like him will always find a way to claim what is not theirs. When I looked up, Mr. Davidson was watching me with that professional distance bank managers have when they're dealing with tears over wills. "There's more," he said gently. "In the boxes, in the vault." The air was cool and dry. My keys felt absurdly small against the heavy steel of the safe deposit drawers. Inside, folders of statements, share certificates I didn't understand, documents about the Colorado property, and boxes of jewelry I'd never seen before, rings and brooches that made my modest chain at home look like costume pieces. There was a second letter tucked among the papers. This one went darker. My father's loans were worse than I'd ever imagined. We'd almost lost the house. My mother had sat at the kitchen table with men she described only as unpleasant while they hinted at what might happen if money didn't appear. She'd used the first years of royalty checks to pay them off, one by one. "You remember me saying he lost everything at poker," she wrote. That was the version a child could bear. The truth is, he risked not just our home, but our safety. I will live with the guilt of not leaving sooner, but I will not apologize for protecting you in the only way I knew how. By the end of that letter, my hands had stopped shaking. I felt hollowed out, like she'd taken an ice cream scoop to my childhood and carved out all the bits I thought I understood. But underneath the emptiness, there was that same slow heat. The letters weren't just apologies, they were instructions. Do not tell him. Protect yourself. Use this money wisely. Do not repeat my mistakes. I walked out of that bank not as the woman who'd walked in. On paper, I was now worth around $3 million. In my bones, I was someone whose mother had lied to her for decades and still, somehow, loved her fiercely enough to plan every step of her escape. And here's the thing I didn't realize. Stepping back into the thin sunshine secrets like that don't just change your bank balance. They change the way you look at every single person in your life, especially the ones who think you'll always pick up the bill. By the time I landed back in the UK, I'd made one quiet decision: I would never again let a man gamble with my future. Not my ex-husband. Not my father, if he ever resurfaced. And certainly not my son with his systems and his lad's trips. As I wheeled my suitcase through arrivals, my phone buzzed. "Danny." A string of messages lit up the screen. "Mum, about Vegas. Can we talk? Tommy's found this insane opportunity. We just need a bit more cash. You know Grandma would want you to help me out." I stared at those words, "You know Grandma would want you to help me," and felt something harden in my chest. Because now I knew exactly what Grandma had wanted. And it wasn't this. That was the moment I realized the inheritance wasn't just going to save me. It was going to test me. And if I played it right, it was going to be the sharpest blade I'd ever had. Stay with me. Because the first time I used it, I didn't just say no. I started a war my son and my ex never saw coming. The first time Danny rang me from Vegas, he was crying in a stairwell, whispering like someone was about to break his kneecaps. You know those texts he sent while I was dragging my suitcase through arrivals. This was the next stage of the performance. And I want you to notice, as I tell you this, the moment where I could have bailed him out and walked straight back into my old life. A couple of days before that call, we'd had our little welcome home scene in the kitchen. He'd barely let me take my coat off. "So, Denver," he said, leaning on the counter, pretending to be casual. "Did the Americans sort you out with anything from Grandma?" Then, there it was. The entitlement, wrapped up in a faux concerned tone. I put the kettle on, because in my world, if the sky is falling, you still make tea. There was some money, I said carefully. Enough that I'm not going to be worrying quite so much. Put it that way. His eyes lit up like a slot machine. Serious. Serious enough, I said, but it's not a free-for-all. Danny, there are going to be rules. He laughed. Rules. It's times our times, family's inheritance. You and me in it. No mention of the necklace he'd pawned. No apology. Just a smooth jump straight to our... If you've ever had someone rewrite ownership mid-sentence like that, you'll know how your stomach drops. I'm the one she left it to, I said, calm. My mother's letters felt heavy in my handbag. Asterisk, protect yourself. Do not repeat my mistakes. Asterisk, you'll benefit. But not the way you think. His jaw tightened. So what? You're gonna sit on it while I'm skint. I could move out. Mum, I could get a proper place. Get ahead. One little boost and I'm sorted. One little boost, I repeated. Is that what the Vegas trip is? His eyes flicked away. We've got a system. Me and Tommy. You put in $2,000. You walk away with 10. Easy. If it's so easy, why does the casino exist? I asked. He rolled his eyes. You don't get it. Look, just spot me for this one run. I'll pay you back double. You'll hardly notice. I let the silence stretch. I could hear the fridge humming. The distant sound of a bus on the main road. Inside, everything in me wanted to say yes, to keep him safe, to keep him close, to be the good mum who always fixed things. Here's my question for you. When your kid is standing in front of you selling you a fantasy, do you think it's kinder to smash it or to fund it? Because that's the knife edge I was on. You can go, I said finally, but I'm not giving you a penny for gambling. I'll cover your rent while you're away so you don't fall behind. That's it. His face twisted. You're being ridiculous. You've literally just come back from collecting times hundreds of thousands times from Grandma, and you're worrying about a few grand stake money. You don't know the amount, I said, and you're not going to. Not yet. This is my line. Danny, I won't fund you throwing money at a table. He stormed off, muttering about how she would have wanted him to have fun while he was young. Maybe you've heard that one too, dragging the dead into the argument as backup. In the end, he went anyway. Scraped together what he could from overdrafts and his mate Tommy's credit card. Left the house with a little suitcase and a big swagger. Kissing my cheek like I was his bank manager, not his mother. I'll come back loaded, he said, grinning. You'll see. 2 days later, the phone rang at 3 a.m. His name on the screen. American Country Code. My heart knew before my brain did. Mum, he hissed. As soon as I answered, it sounded echoey, like he really was in a concrete stairwell. I'm in trouble. My stomach went cold. What kind of trouble? The system, it didn't work. He stammered. The tables turned. The dealer was a shark. I don't know. I'm down bad. I had to take credit from the casino. Like an actual marker. They want $12,000 back. Asterisk. Now, asterisk. 12,000 times what? Times I said. Dollars, pounds, dollars. Obviously. It's nothing to you. Mum, you've got what? Millions sitting there. I just need you to transfer it, and then we're square. I'll pay you back. I swear to God, the old me would have been mentally calculating exchange rates, interest. The hit to my overdraft. The new me saw my father's shadow, sitting at a table he couldn't afford to sit at, gambling with other people's safety. I'm not sending anything, I said. You're coming home. I times can't times. His voice cracked. You don't understand. These people. They're not like Barclays, ringing you about a missed direct debit. They've got security. They said if I walk without paying, they'll do what I cut in. Break your legs, dump you in the desert. You've watched too many films. Danny, you're being heartless. He spat. You're just gonna sit there on Grandma's money and let them ruin me. I'm not gonna let you throw good money after bad. I said. My hand was shaking, but my voice wasn't. You go to the desk in the morning. You ask to speak to the credit office. And you tell them you're flying home. I'll call them myself and arrange a payment plan. They won't do a plan, he said. They said it's now or never. Then I'll confirm that with them directly, I said. What's the name of the casino? He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. Why? Because if I'm going to get involved, I said, I'm going to talk to adults, not scared, boys who exaggerate. Silence. Then, sullenly, he gave me the name. We went round in circles for another 5 minutes, him begging, me repeating, come home, come home, come home, until he hung up on me with a choked, I can't believe you're doing this. The guilt was like acid. I lay there in the dark, phone glowing on the bedside table, staring at the ceiling. I could end this now. I thought, one transfer, one concession, no more sick feeling, no more imagining him being dragged into some back room. But every time I nearly cracked, I saw my mother's handwriting. Asterisk, if your father ever comes back, he must never know about this money. Men like him will always find a way to claim what is not theirs. I got up, padded into the living room in my dressing gown, and opened my laptop. The casino's website had a customer service number. I rang, heart banging in my chest. After some hold music and polite scripts, I got through to a woman with a weary voice. I'm calling about a credit line, I said. My son has taken a marker and he's telling me he owes $12,000. I want to confirm the amount and your policies. After several security questions, his full name, address, date of birth. She pulled up his account. All right, ma'am, I have Daniel Mitchell here. He has an outstanding marker of $2,347, plus interest if it isn't settled within 60 days. Not 12, two and a bit, still serious, but not limb-breaking serious. Can you say that amount again? I asked, even though I'd heard it perfectly. She did. I almost laughed. It came out as a small, disbelieving puff of air. And your process, I said slowly, if someone can't pay that in one go. We work out a payment plan, she said. We do not report to any external agencies unless there's sustained non-payment. We also don't, send anyone round, if that's what you're asking. We're a regulated business. So nobody's gonna hurt him, I said, my voice going sharp without meaning to. No, ma'am, she said, that would be illegal. I thanked her, sat back, let the truth settle over me like a blanket that was both comforting and suffocating. He had lied. He had tripled the amount in his story. He'd reached straight for fear, for drama, for the image of nameless men who do terrible things, because he knew it pressed my buttons. Tell me honestly, if you'd heard that difference between what he claimed and what he owed, would you have transferred the money anyway, just to keep the peace? Or would you have done what I did and decided this was the hill you were willing to die on? I'm genuinely curious what you'd have done in my place. I won't be paying this, I told the woman, but I'll be telling my son to contact you about a plan. He will pay it himself. She sounded almost relieved. Honestly, ma'am, that's often the healthiest option. He came back 3 days later, gray-faced and smaller somehow. The swagger was gone. His suitcase bumped up the front steps like it weighed 100 kilos. I waited until he dumped it by the stairs and collapsed at the kitchen table. Then I set the mug of tea in front of him and laid out the printout I'd made of my notes from the casino call. $2,347. I said, not $12,000. He stared at the paper. Color crept up his neck. They lied. They didn't, I said. I rang them myself. They also told me they don't send heavies round to break people's legs. They send letters. He slammed his palm on the table. The mug jumped. You went behind my back. I told you not to. You told me a story designed to scare me into wiring you money. I snapped. I checked the facts. That's not behind your back. Danny, that's being an adult. His eyes were bright with rage and shame. You're letting me get destroyed over nothing. You've got times millions, asterisk. Mom, don't pretend you don't. You went to bloody America, came back all floating on air. You think I don't see it? I took a breath. This was the pivot point. The moment where my old self wrestled with the new. I am not letting you be destroyed, I said quietly. I'm letting you face the consequences of your decisions. There's a difference. You sound just like Grandma, he spat. Good, I said, because she spent 30 years protecting money from men who thought they were owed it. I'm not about to hand it over to a slot machine. He pushed his chair back, scraping the floor. You're choosing cash over your own son. I'm choosing your future over your comfort, I said. Sit down. For a second, I thought he'd walk out. Then the fight went out of him, all at once. Like someone had punctured a balloon, he slumped back down. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You are going to ring the casino and arrange a payment plan. You are going to get a full-time job, not just bits of shifts whenever you feel like it. You are going to make a budget, an actual written one, and you are going to stick to it. No more gambling. No more trips with Tommy. If you live under my roof, we do it my way. He barked a laugh. Your times, roof times, you rent this place. For now, I said, and while you're here, you're paying me rent for that basement room. A fair amount. Not because I need it, but because you need to feel money leaving your account when you screw up. His mouth hung open. You want me to pay you to live in this damp little dungeon? Yes, I said. Welcome to adulthood. He looked genuinely hurt. That was the worst part. Under all the bluster, he was still that boy who'd cried when his dad left, who I'd tried to protect from every bump. But I could see my father, too, sitting in him like a ghost. If I didn't stop the pattern here, I never would. This isn't punishment. I said, softer. I'll keep a roof over your head. I'll keep the lights on. I'm not throwing you out, but I am done rescuing you from yourself. He swallowed. And if I say no, then you find somewhere else to live. I said, and you find someone else to call at 3 a.m. For a long time, the only sound was the clock. Then he reached for the mug with both hands, like his fingers might drop it, and muttered, Fine. I stayed sitting while he made the call. Phone on speaker at the table. I listened as his voice shook, as he asked about installments, as he agreed to an amount that would eat half his wages for months. Every instinct I had screamed at me to step in, to say it was too much, to offer to cover just one payment. I didn't. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The weeks that followed were strange. He took on extra shifts in a warehouse on the industrial estate, came home late, shoulders aching, clothes smelling of cardboard and sweat. He grumbled, but he went. I saw bank alerts on his phone payment to Cassino name, regular as rent. Slowly, the fear in his eyes was replaced by something else, a kind of tired pride. He didn't say it. Of course. But I saw it. And me, I started looking at estate agents' windows the way other people look at shop displays. There was a development down by the river I'd always dismissed as for other people glass balconies. Little communal gardens. A man at reception who wore a tie. One afternoon, on my lunch break, I walked in, just having a look. I told the woman in the smart blazer. We went up in the lift. The flat she showed me was on the 3rd floor. Open plan. Big windows. A little balcony with a view of the water and the weeping willows on the opposite bank. I stood there, fingers on the cool metal railing, and felt my chest loosen for the first time in years. How much, I asked. She told me. It was a lot, but it wasn't impossible. Not with a Denver bank account and a mother who'd planned for my future from the day I was born. You'd need a mortgage. she said briskly. Or unless she looked me up and down, recalibrating. Some people in this block are cash buyers. I'd be a cash buyer. I heard myself say. It was like handing in my old life along with the deposit. We did the paperwork over the next couple of weeks. Transfers, ID checks, boring but necessary things. Each time I moved money, I thought of my mother and her letters. Asterisk, do not let men like your father near this. Use it wisely. Use it to give yourself choices. The day I signed the final document, Danny came with me, mostly for the promise of pizza afterwards. He lounged in the reception chair while I spoke to the solicitor and the sales rep, half listening, scrolling his phone. And as we've confirmed, the woman said brightly, funds have been received in full. It's all very straightforward when it's a cash purchase. I saw it land in his face like a stone. Cash. Purchase. Full. His eyes flicked from her to me to the number on the form she'd left half covered on the desk. That was the exact second his expression changed. Not just surprise, calculation. On the way home, he was quiet in the car, staring out of the window at the river we'd soon be living above. Every now and then, his phone buzzed. I caught the reflection of his thumbs moving fast in the passenger side mirror. Messages flying out to someone? I had no proof. Not then. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My mother's warning about men who will always find a way to claim what is not theirs hummed in my ears. I'd just bought myself a beautiful new life with her secret money. I didn't know yet that the price of that view would be waking up, the interest of the one man who'd spent our marriage convinced every penny in my pocket was really his. Keep listening. Because the first sign of him circling back wasn't a knock on my door. It was a message on my son's phone that I was never meant to see. The first message from my ex-husband popped up on Danny's phone while he was in the shower. And I only saw it because the screen lit my face as I walked past. If you've ever had your stomach drop just from a name on a notification, you'll know exactly what that felt like. And tell me honestly, would you have looked away? Or would you have read it the way I did? We'd only just moved into the riverfront flat. Boxes everywhere, the smell of fresh paint, that odd mix of excitement and exhaustion you get when the lift doors shut on your old life. Danny had dumped his phone on the kitchen island next to a half-eaten slice of pizza and wandered off to scrub warehouse dust off himself. The screen buzzed and flashed. Asterisk, asterisk, Dad. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Heard about the cash. Mate. Mom always lands on her feet. We should talk about making sure no one takes advantage of her. Yeah, asterisk. Dad. Not Carl. Not the man who turned my life into a spreadsheet. Just times Dad asterisk. Casually weighing in on a flat he hadn't paid for in a life he no longer lived in. My skin prickled. Asterisk. Heard about the cash. Asterisk. Of course he had. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled down the hallway. I stepped back from the island like the phone had burnt me. Danny patted in. Towel round his waist. Hair dripping, grabbing for the phone with damp fingers. Everything all right, I said. Too light. Yeah, he muttered, turning it so I couldn't see the screen. His eyes did that flicker thing guilt. Calculation. Annoyance, all fighting behind them. Just Dad. Chill. I didn't say. Asterisk. How exactly has he heard about the cash when I've told you not to tell anyone, times I didn't say anything? Because I wanted to hear it from his mouth, not from a pop-up bubble on glass. He disappeared into the basement to get dressed. A minute later, I heard his voice through the floorboards, low and eager. And that was the moment I realized the real battle for my inheritance wasn't going to be fought in a bank. It was going to be fought in my own kitchen. Carl rang me 2 days later. That's how long it took him to warm up. Apparently, I was on the balcony, watering the 3 little pots of herbs I'd bought like some middle-aged Pinterest cliche. When my mobile flashed his name, I hadn't saved his contact as Dad. "Hello, Carl," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Margaret," he boomed, all false warmth. I could picture the fake concern on his face, the way he used to talk to nervous patients before presenting them with a 600 pounds crown. "Heard some interesting news." "Did you?" I said. "Don't play coy." He chuckled. "Our boy let slip that your dear late mother was sitting on a little nest egg. Very substantial," he said. "And a cash purchase on a riverfront flat, not too shabby for a humble secretary." Old habits die hard. I felt my shoulders creep up, the old shame about money and class and what I deserved prickling under my skin. Then I looked at the river, at the way the light caught the surface, and thought, no, not this time. "What do you want?" "Carl," I said. He did a wounded sigh. "Can't a man phone his ex-wife to congratulate her on finally getting a break? You don't ring anyone unless there's something in it for you." I said, "So let's skip the preamble." There was a tiny, telling pause. Then he slipped into his actual agenda. 15 years of marriage, he said. You backing me through dental school. Us building a practice together. I think we can both agree I was instrumental in you being in the position to, invest wisely now. "Are you asking for a thank you card?" I said. "Or a cut?" He laughed, as if I'd said something adorable. "I'm talking about fairness. Moral claim. You and I both know divorce settlements never reflect the real story. But this windfall, this is family money. Really. Danny's future. Our future. If you think about it, there is no times our asterisk." I said, "The divorce was final. Remember, years before my mother's money came to light. Legally, you have no claim." "Legally," he echoed, as if that was a vulgar word. "I'm not talking about lawyers. Darling, I'm talking about doing the right thing. I've got a practice to keep afloat, staff wages to meet, the bank breathing down my neck about equipment loans. You sitting on all that cash, while I cut in. Let me stop you there. Your business is your problem. My inheritance is mine. They are separate, and they will remain separate." His voice hardened. "You wouldn't have had the luxury to toddle off to America and pick up a check if I hadn't shouldered the financial burden all these years. You controlled the money and made me ask permission to buy a jumper." I said, "That's not shouldering a burden. That's holding me by the throat." Silence. I'd never said it that bluntly to him before. It felt good. When he spoke again, his tone had flipped back to smarmy. "Look, we're grown-ups. I'm proposing a partnership. You put some capital into the practice. I give you a share. We tidy things up. Maybe look at, I don't know, making it official again. For Danny, keep the family unit strong while there's this much at stake." It actually took me a moment to realize what he was suggesting. "You're asking me to remarry you times so you can get to my money asterisk. For tax efficiency, for stability." "Absolutely not," I said. "You're not coming into this flat. You're not coming near this account. And you are certainly not coming back into my bed to get a better look at my bank statements." He exhaled sharply. "Don't be dramatic. Margaret." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "You haven't seen dramatic yet." I hung up before he could reply. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. With adrenaline, with the raw, unfamiliar feeling of having actually said no. Let me ask you something. When an ex suddenly frames their greed as morality and family, do you buy it? Have you ever watched someone try to wrap self-interest in tinsel and call it love? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Of course, he didn't go away. Men like Carl don't take no. They treat it as an opening offer. He started small, using Danny as a delivery system. Dad says sudden money can mess with your head. Danny mentioned one evening as we unpacked plates. Casual, like he was talking about the weather. He reckons you should let someone, you know, professional, help you manage it. Before sharks get involved. Your father is a dentist, I said, not Warren Bloody Buffett. He knows about business. Danny shrugged. He said these lawyers in the city will fleece you if you're not careful. Families should be the ones advising you, not strangers paid by the hour. I could hear Carl in every syllable. Asterisk. Family. Strangers. Fleecing. Asterisk. The man could run a one-man propaganda service. Funny, I said, because a stranger paid by the hour is exactly what saved your grandma's money from my father. And now from your dad. Danny flinched. That's harsh. So is filing a credit marker in Vegas under your name? I said, but here we are. He sulked for the rest of the evening, stomping around the flat like a bear in a too-small cave. I let him. It's amazing how much space silence takes up when you refuse to fill it with apologies you don't owe. The stranger paid by the hour arrived in my life courtesy of my friend Patricia. We were having coffee in a little place off the high street. She'd insisted on seeing the new flat, and I'd insisted on cake, and I unloaded the whole mess. The bank in Denver, my mother's letters, Danny's debt, Carl's phone call, right down to the remarriage pitch. Patricia stirred her tea so hard I thought the spoon might snap. He actually suggested getting back together, she said. He's got some nerve. That's one word for it. I said, you need a proper solicitor, she said firmly. Not just whatever wills and probate bod you find on Google. Someone who understands trusts, asset protection, all that. When my mum died, Jonathan Walsh sorted the whole estate out. Very calm, very clever. He'll know exactly how to keep Carl's grubby hands off your money. Is that really necessary? I asked. It felt aggressive. Somehow, like building a fortress when maybe all I needed was a higher fence. Patricia gave me a look. You've just told me your ex is trying to talk you into marrying him for cash. Do you really want to rely on hoping he gets bored as a strategy? Fair point. I rang Jonathan's office that afternoon. Jonathan Walsh was the sort of man who made you feel safer just by existing. Late 50s, gray hair, calm eyes, an office full of thick files and discreetly expensive furniture. I'm not rich. I blurted in the first 5 minutes. Not really. It's just more than I've ever had. And I've spent my whole life being told I'm bad with money, even when I wasn't the one spending it. I don't want to ruin what my mother did. He steepled his fingers. You have 2 problems, Margaret, he said. One is practical, where the money sits, how it's invested, what happens to it when you die. The other is human, ex-spouses, children, people who feel entitled or who are vulnerable to manipulation. He'd hit the nerve so cleanly I almost laughed. That about sums it up. Your ex-husband, Carl, he said, glancing at his notes, has no legal claim to your inheritance. It was acquired after the divorce. Correct. Correct, I said, but he's very good at making people doubt themselves, including judges, if he gets that far. Then we reduced the routes by which he can get that far. Jonathan said, I'd recommend an irrevocable trust. You transfer the bulk of your assets into it, the funds in Denver. This flat, any investments. You remain the primary beneficiary during your lifetime. But control is exercised by a trustee. It becomes significantly harder for anyone, including an ex-spouse, or even, in some circumstances, a child, to argue that you should be stripped of control. Stripped of control, I echoed. He folded his hands. Guardianship, deputyship applications. Spurious claims that you're not capable of managing your affairs. I've seen it before. People weaponize the Mental Capacity Act when there's money involved. I thought of Carl's voice on the phone. All faux pity. Asterisk. Make sure no one takes advantage of her. Yeah. Asterisk. A chill ran down my back. It wasn't paranoia. Then there was a route for him, if he chose to take it. I also want you to have a thorough mental capacity assessment, Jonathan went on. Not because I doubt you, because a report now, while there's no active court case, will carry a lot of weight if anyone tries to suggest you've been unduly influenced. You think he'd go that far, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I think men who are financially desperate and used to control will go as far as they're allowed, Jonathan said calmly. Our job is to stop him at the paperwork, not in front of a judge. He drew up the structure over the next couple of weeks. I signed documents transferring ownership of the flat to the trust. In a sense, I no longer owned my own home. A legal entity did, with me as the protected beneficiary. It was both unnerving and oddly freeing, like putting something precious in a safe you knew you couldn't absent-mindedly leave open. Do not tell Carl about the trust, Jonathan said, as we signed the final deed. In fact, I'd advise you not to discuss its details with anyone, not even your son. The less information out there, the fewer angles for attack. I nodded, understood, and I meant it. I changed my will. I named backup trustees. I did all the boring, grown-up things my mother had spent her life preparing for in secret. Somewhere between the T and the signatures, I became the sort of woman who has a file in a solicitor's office labeled Mitchell, Trust and Estate. Then the police knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday. I'd taken the day off to sort through boxes. The flat smelled of cardboard and the fancy candle Patricia had bought me as a housewarming dowd. When the buzzer went, I assumed it was a delivery. Instead, the man at my door was in plain clothes with a lanyard, and that particular air policemen have when they're trying not to look too intimidating. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, I'm Detective Sergeant Rodriguez, local CID. Mind if I come in for a chat? That little animal in my chest, the one that had twitched when I opened the empty jewelry box all those months ago, started clawing again. Is this about my son? I asked immediately, because if he's got himself into something, it's about you. Actually, he said, we've had a safeguarding referral, a report that you might be a vulnerable adult, being coerced into making financial decisions against your best interests. It took a second to land. Someone saying I'm being abused. Financially, yes, he said. He glanced past me at the flat. May I? I let him in. We sat at the dining table, the same one where I'd made Danny ring the casino, and he took out a notebook. I'll be straight with you, he said. The report mentions an inheritance, sudden change in circumstances, possible undue influence by professional advisors. It also alleges you've been forced to withhold funds from your son, causing him hardship. He didn't say Carl's name. He didn't need to. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It burst out, sharp and ugly. Mrs. Mitchell, he said carefully. I'm sorry, I said, wiping my eyes. It's just, that man has some nerve. I told him everything. Not every tiny detail, but enough: the pawned necklace, the bank in Denver, the inheritance, Danny's Vegas stunt, the condo, Carl's phone call and remarriage pitch, the attempts to paint himself as the noble protector of family money. D.S. Rodriguez listened, pen moving now and then. He asked sensible questions about my health, my memory, my understanding of the trust. I answered every one. At the risk of overstepping, he said eventually, you seem perfectly capable of managing your affairs. Thank you, I said dryly. I did manage to get through a divorce without eating my own checkbook. After all, he smiled. I thought as much. Safeguarding referrals are important. We have to take them seriously. But occasionally, people try to use them as leverage in family disputes. You mean my ex is wasting police time to scare me? I said. He closed his notebook. I didn't say that, but I will be closing this with no further action. And I'll be feeding back through the appropriate channels that making malicious or vexatious reports can have consequences. As he left, he paused at the door. If he escalates, he said, come straight back to us. Don't wait until it's all on fire. That night, Danny hovered by the fridge, clearly wanting to say something. Dad says the police went round, he said at last. He's just worried you're being taken for a ride by that solicitor bloke. He said some of these trust things can lock family out. Like, permanently. That's not what you've done, is it? I looked at my son, the boy who'd lied about a casino debt, who'd worked double shifts to pay it off, who was now being fed lines about family locked out by a man who couldn't stand the idea of a woman having a locked door he didn't have a key for. I've done what I need to do to keep us safe, I said. From your dad, from anyone else who thinks they've got a claim. He frowned. He reckons we should all sit down. Talk about a proper family strategy for the money. Not just you and some lawyer. He wants to take me out to dinner. Go through it all. There it was. The next move. The invitation to the table where the real game would be played. Are you going? I asked. He shrugged, but his eyes slid away. Might as well hear him out. Right, he is my dad. I wanted to forbid it. To say, absolutely not. You're not going anywhere near him without me or a tape recorder or a fire extinguisher. Instead, I said, if you go, remember this. He loves control more than he loves either of us. Don't hand him anything he can use. Danny hesitated. For the first time, I saw something new in his face when he talked about Carl. Not just admiration, not just hurt, doubt. Yeah, he muttered. I know what he's like. He slipped his phone into his pocket then, fingers lingering on it a fraction too long, thinking, calculating. I didn't realize, watching him walk out the door to meet his father, that he was about to turn that phone into the one thing Carl couldn't charm. Bully or lie his way past. And that when he came back, what was on that screen would either save me or blow the last pieces of our family to dust. I didn't know it at the time, but while Carl was buttering the bread rolls at that cozy Italian, my son had already opened the voice recorder on his phone and slid it face down between the salt and pepper. You remember I told you he walked out of the flat with doubt in his eyes and his phone in his pocket. This is what he did with it, and this is where my revenge stopped being emotional and became legal. Later, when I finally listened to that recording, I could smell the place. Cutlery, low music, the hiss of the coffee machine. Carl started off like he always did, smooth as olive oil. So, he said, all paternal warmth. Our girl's done all right out of dear old Granny. Our girl, as if he'd been there clipping coupons with us. Danny sounded wary. She's sorted. Yeah, got the flat, money in some American bank. She keeps talking about trusts and solicitors. Carl laughed. Of course she does. Little Margaret with her nose in the rule book. Look, mate, that's why I wanted to talk to you. Sudden wealth, it can send people funny, paranoid, latching on to advisors who tell them everyone's out to get them. Jonathan's solid, Danny said. Patricia used him, and he gets paid every time your mum panics. Carl cut in. I could almost see his hand waving dismissively. These city boys love a lonely widow. They wrap it all up in talk of trusts and capacity, and before you know it, the family's locked out and some stranger's deciding where the money goes. I don't think she's lonely, Danny said, which hurt in a strange, sideways way. She just doesn't want anyone rinsing it. Carl's voice shifted. Coaxing? Listen, I don't care what she does day to day. New sofa, flash holidays, whatever. But we're talking serious sums here. Enough to secure our time's future. Yours, mine, and she is not thinking straight. Her head's fine, Danny said, sharper now. Police came round and everything. They said she's on the ball. That stopped me when I first heard it, asterisk. He'd defended me, asterisk. On the recording, Carl snorted. The police? Right. They don't see what we see. You told me yourself she's turned on you. Won't help with the debt. Won't invest in the practice. Won't even discuss it. That's not normal. Or maybe she's just done bailing people out. Danny muttered. Carl ignored that. Here's the thing, he said, lowering his voice. There are routes when someone's not capable. Guardianship. Court of protection. Lovely little mechanisms to make sure vulnerable people don't throw money away because some smooth solicitors scared them into trusts and wills. I heard cutlery scraping, Danny shifting. You're not seriously saying she's lost it. I am saying, Carl replied, very clearly, that whether she's lost it or not is less important than getting control before she does. If we have to say she's not coping, we say it. If we have to show she's being manipulated, we show it. I don't care if she can still do a crossword in ink, Danny. I care that my son isn't left with nothing because his mother's got some martyr complex about doing better than grandma. There it was. Naked. I don't care if she can still do a crossword in ink. That's the bit I've replayed the most. That and the next line, one way or another, he said. I am getting control of that money. If you were Danny, hearing your own father say that, what would you have done? Sat there and nodded along. Or slid your thumb over to that little red button and made sure the truth was captured forever. Be honest with yourself. The recording crackled. Plates clinked. Then Danny's younger, tighter voice. This sounds dodgy. Dad. It's strategy. Carl said smoothly. Family strategy. Don't go soft on me now. That was the end of what mattered. The rest was just Carl talking about golf and implants. Like he hadn't just plotted to have me declared incompetent over a dish of carbonara. Danny didn't play it to me that night. He came home late, smelling of garlic and cheap red wine, eyes too bright. How was it? I asked, holding onto the back of a dining chair. He's got ideas, Danny said. About the money. About you. I'm knackered. He disappeared downstairs. I lay awake half the night listening to the faint bass of whatever he'd put on to drown his thoughts out. The next day, he was quiet, skittish, shoving his phone deep into his pocket whenever I came near. It was 3 days before he handed it over. We were in the kitchen. The river was flat and gray outside. Sky, the color of washing up water. He put the phone on the table between us like it was evidence. I did something, he said. Don't kick off. Yeah. He pressed play. I listened. Once. Twice. By the third time, my hands had stopped shaking and gone very, very still. Does he know you recorded him? I asked. Danny swallowed. No. You told me he loves control more than anything. I wanted to, see which way he was leaning before I chose a side. And I said, he met my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see a boy. I saw a man, scared, but choosing. I'm not letting him do that to you, he said hoarsely. Use me as a battering ram. Make out you've lost your marbles just because you won't write him a check. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you, I said. We're going to need this. If you've ever had someone who hurt you also hand you the match you needed to burn the whole lie down, you'll know that feeling. Pride and grief and grim joy all tangled together. The midnight knock came a week later. I was half asleep on the sofa, some detective drama muttering away on the telly. When the banging started, not a polite ring of the buzzer, full-fisted, insistent thuds on the front door of the building. Then on my flat, once someone let him in. Margaret Carl's voice, loud and slurred in the corridor. Open the bloody door. My heart shot into my throat. I grabbed my phone and went to the door but didn't unchain it. Just looked through the peephole. There he was. Shirt untucked, tie hanging loose, eyes wild. In his hand, a sheaf of papers, some of them already creased. I know what you've done, he shouted. Trusts, shell companies, all that sneaky crap. Go home, Carl, I said through the door. You're disturbing the neighbors. You think you can hide behind some solicitor, he yelled, smacking the papers against the door so hard I jumped. You think you can cut me and my son out because some yank bank thinks you're clever. A door down the corridor opened a crack. Mrs. Singh's voice drifted out, anxious. Everything all right? I've called the police. I said, loudly enough that she'd hear it too. They're on their way. Good, Carl barked. They can witness this. You're not well. Margaret, you're paranoid. You've been coerced. I'm doing my duty. His duty? That nearly made me laugh. Instead, I stood there, pulse hammering, listening to his rant about mental health and vulnerable adults until the lift dinged and 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Sir, you need to calm down. One of them said, You're causing a disturbance. She's not safe, Carl insisted, brandishing the papers. Look at this. Applications, trusts, foreign accounts. She's being manipulated, and she's cutting off our son. I've applied to the court to be her guardian. They'll need to see this. One officer gently steered him away from the door. The other approached me. Mrs. Mitchell, he said quietly, are you all right? Fine, I said, though my hands were still shaking. Just tired of being shouted at in my pajamas? He gave a sympathetic half smile and held out an envelope. He's right about one thing. I'm afraid. He's made an application to the Court of Protection. Petition for a deputyship, effectively guardianship over your property and affairs. We're required to serve it. I took the envelope like it might bite. Through the crack, I saw Carl still ranting at the other officer, face red, veins standing out in his neck. Do I have to let him in? I asked. No, the officer said. In fact, I'd advise you don't. We've got enough here to suggest he's, at the very least, distressed and possibly under the influence. We'll be escorting him off the premises and logging this call. If you'd like to speak to us formally about his behavior or consider a restraining order, that's an option. Not tonight, I said faintly. Tonight, I just want him gone. They took him. His protests echoed down the corridor. I'm her time's husband, asterisk. This is outrageous. I'm protecting her. Until the lift door shut on his voice. I closed my door, slid the chain across, and sat on the hallway floor with the envelope in my lap. When I opened it, my hands left little sweat marks on the paper. In neat legal language, it laid out Carl's case that I was increasingly forgetful, overly influenced by professional advisors, making irrational financial decisions and refusing reasonable financial support to my adult child despite having ample means. He proposed himself as my deputy, my legal decision-maker, on the grounds that he had extensive experience running a successful dental practice and a long-standing commitment to the applicant's welfare. There's a special kind of rage that comes from seeing your life rewritten in black and white by the person who caused half the damage. It felt like watching him reach through the page to take the pen out of my hand. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the locket warm against my collarbone and my mother's letters spread out on the coffee table. Asterisk. Men like him will always find a way to claim what is not theirs. Asterisk. She'd literally written me the script. Years before this man decided to try to own my mind on court paper. By morning, the fear had hardened into something else. Focus. I rang Jonathan at 9 on the dot. This is exactly what we discussed, he said, after reading through the petition, his jaw tightening. He's taken the safeguarding process and the court system and tried to turn them into a crowbar. Can he do it? I asked. Can he actually take over? Not if we do our job. He said, we'll file a robust response. We'll get updated evidence from Dr. Santos about your capacity. I'll instruct a private investigator to look into his financial position. If he's seeking control while drowning in debt, the court will want to know. And we have that recording, don't we? Danny sat in the client chair beside me, shoulders hunched, hands knotted together. Yes, he said quietly, I've still got it. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. Then we have his motive in his own words. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and documents. Dr. Santos sat with me for over an hour, asking about my finances, my understanding of the trust, my plans. I answered every question, reciting numbers I never would have dared admit I knew back when Carl ran our accounts. Any hallucinations, confusion, significant memory lapses? She asked gently. Only when my ex speaks, I said. She laughed and wrote something down. The private investigator Jonathan hired dug into company's house filings, court records, credit reports. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd suspected and dreaded. Carl's practice was in trouble. Late payments on equipment leases, a secured loan teetering on default. He'd refinanced the house he kept in his name twice. For a man obsessed with looking successful, he was sinking fast. He needs a lifeline, Jonathan said, sliding the report across his desk. And he thinks you're it. Meanwhile, Danny became quieter, but steadier. He worked his shifts, paid the casino, handed me small envelopes with his rent in cash each month with a grim little nod. One evening, he stopped me in the hallway. I'm going to court for you, he blurted. If they'll let me. I want to tell them what he's like, and I want them to hear what he said in that restaurant. You don't have to choose sides publicly. I told him. That's a lot to put on your shoulders. He shook his head. I already chose when I pressed record. Have you ever watched someone you love finally step out of another person's shadow? It's like seeing them twice at once, who they've been and who they might be, and it's one of the most painful, beautiful things you can witness. The day of the hearing, the air in the court building tasted like dust and old coffee. It wasn't some grand crown court drama, just a bland little room in the court of protection with a crest on the wall and water jugs on the tables. Carl sat at one side with his barrister, in a suit that was trying too hard. I caught the faint whiff of aftershave I used to buy him every Christmas, and my stomach lurched. At my side, Jonathan was all quiet competence, files neatly stacked. Behind us sat Danny, pale but upright, and Patricia, gripping a tissue. Carl's barrister started with the usual performance, soft voice, grave concern. My client is simply trying to ensure that a vulnerable woman is not exploited, he said. There has been a dramatic change in Mrs. Mitchell's financial circumstances. She is making uncharacteristic decisions, placing the bulk of her wealth into complex legal structures, refusing to support her son, ignoring the advice of her family. Mr. Mitchell, who has known her for over 20 years, has observed increasing suspicion and confusion. He simply seeks the court's assistance to protect her from undue influence. I stared at the jug of water, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. When it was Jonathan's turn, his voice cut through the performance like a scalpel. Your Honor, he said, what Mr. Mitchell calls uncharacteristic is simply a woman, now financially independent, making choices that do not advantage her ex-husband. He produced Dr. Santos's report. Detective Rodriguez's note closing the safeguarding complaint. Evidence of my spending mortgage-free flat. Modest withdrawals. No wild splurges. This is not a woman throwing money out of the window, he said, This is a woman who bought a sensible property, set up a protective trust on professional advice, and has continued to live well within her means. The only people who seem distressed by her prudence are those who feel entitled to spend her money for her. Then he called Danny. My son walked to the witness chair like a man walking onto thin ice. He took the oath. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "Has your mother become confused about her finances?" Jonathan asked. "No," Danny said. "If anything, she understands them more now than she ever did when Dad was in charge." "Has she been pressured into setting up the trust?" "She asked a solicitor because she didn't want to end up like my grandma," he said. "Hiding money from men who'd blow it. That's not pressure. That's learning." "And your father's concern," Jonathan said, "is it for your mother's well-being, in your view, or for something else?" Danny glanced at Carl. For a moment, the boy flickered back. Then he looked at the judge instead. "He told me," Danny said, voice suddenly very clear, "that he didn't care if she could still do a crossword in ink. He said one way or another he was getting control of the money. I recorded it." The hush in that room was almost physical. Jonathan produced the phone. The judge listened with headphones, but we could all hear enough. The tone, the intent, leaking out tinny and damning. Carl went blotchy, muttering to his barrister. "Your Honor," Jonathan said quietly when it finished, "we submit that this application is not about protecting a vulnerable woman. It is about rescuing a failing dental practice by seizing a former spouse's inheritance." There was more legal arguments I barely took in, but the gist was simple. I was not mad, or manipulated, or vulnerable in the way Carl needed me to be. I was inconveniently sane and increasingly unwilling to bankroll his life. When the judge finally spoke, he didn't look impressed. "This application," he said, "appears to be a gross misuse of the court of protection process." He turned a cool gaze on Carl. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "this court exists to safeguard those who genuinely lack capacity, not to adjudicate family disagreements about money. On the evidence before me, including your own words, I find that Mrs. Mitchell has full capacity to manage her affairs. She has taken sensible steps to protect her assets. Your petition is therefore dismissed." My knees went weak. Jonathan's hand rested, just for a second, on my arm. "With prejudice?" the judge added. "I see no justification for any repeat application on similar grounds. Furthermore, I am directing that a transcript of these proceedings be sent to the relevant authorities to consider whether your conduct amounts to an abuse of process or any other offense. Costs to be borne by the applicant." Translation: not only had Carl lost, he'd have to pay for the privilege of failing. And someone in a very serious office might be having a quiet look at his behavior later. Jonathan also applied then and there for a non-molestation order. Given the midnight banging on my door, the police log, the wild accusations, it was granted. Carl was ordered to stay away from me and the flat. Walking out of that courtroom, locket warm at my throat, legal papers in my bag, my son at my side. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy the symmetry. After years of being told I couldn't be trusted with money, a judge had effectively ruled that the only person who couldn't be trusted in that room was the man who'd always claimed to know best. But here's the thing about revenge. The moment you get it, you're left standing in the quiet with one question. Asterisk. Now what asterisk? I had my money, my freedom, my ex legally muzzled, and a son who'd finally seen his father clearly. What I chose to do with all of that next is the bit that still keeps me up at night. The first scholarship application I opened had my son's name on it. You know, that strange jolt when a familiar name appears somewhere it absolutely shouldn't be. That's what this was. And yes, part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen it. It was 6 months after the court hearing. 6 months after the judge had told Carl, in so many words, to get out of my bank account and out of my life. I'd spent those months trying to answer that question I left you with, asterisk, now what asterisk, and this, apparently, was one of my answers. I sat at the dining table, River sliding past outside, and clicked on the file asterisk asterisk Mitchell. Daniel application essay asterisk asterisk. The first line made me laugh in spite of myself. Asterisk. I used to think money was magic, and my mum was the magician. Before I tell you what he wrote next, I want you to walk with me through the months that led to that moment. Because this is where revenge stops being about winning in court and starts being about who you choose to become when you finally stopped being scared. And I'm curious, if you'd had a fortune dropped in your lap after years of being controlled, what would you have done with it, honestly? The weeks after the hearing were oddly quiet. No more midnight banging. No more police at the door. Carl was busy dealing with the consequences the judge had promised. Letters from regulators. Grumbling from the bank over his loans. Solicitors of his own to pay. My world shrank back down to something almost normal, the flat, the river, work. My son, Danny, kept his head down. He worked his warehouse shifts, came home in his high-vis and steel-toed boots, collapsed on the sofa, with aches he didn't whinge about as much as he used to. Once a month he handed me an envelope with his rent money and a screenshot of his latest payment to the casino. Another chunk gone, he'd say, forcing a grin. I didn't gloat. I didn't swoop in with a bailout. I just nodded and made sure there was something hot on the stove. 3 months after court, he came into the kitchen with that envelope and a different look on his face. That's the last one, he said. The last what I asked, stirring pasta. Payment, he said. Casinos cleared. Letter came yesterday. Debt's done. He laid the envelope on the table anyway. Out of habit, I pushed it back to him. Keep it, I said. You've earned it. He stared at me like I'd handed him a live grenade. You're not mad that I took so long. I turned the hob down and really looked at him. He'd lost weight, hardened up. Something in his eyes had changed. Less of that slippery look, more steadiness. You didn't take so long. I said, you took exactly as long as you needed to learn something my father never learned. He swallowed. What's that? That nobody is coming to save you, I said. And that's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's a chance. He leaned on the back of a chair, fingers digging into the wood. I hated you. For a bit, he said, voice rough. When you wouldn't pay it, when you let me ring them and set up that plan, I thought you wanted to watch me suffer. Did you? I asked. For a bit, he said again. And then? I don't know. Coming home knackered with my own money in my pocket, even if most of it went straight back out. It felt different, like I'd actually earned the air I was breathing. He looked away, cheeks coloring. And I'm sorry, he blurted. For the necklace, for pawning it, for lying about Vegas, for all of it. You didn't deserve that, and Grandma definitely didn't. If you've ever waited years for someone to say the words you know they owe you, you'll know how surreal it feels when they finally come. Like you're walking through a doorway you'd half convinced yourself was painted on. I know, I said quietly. Thank you. I get now, he added, eyes shining. Why you didn't pay it. If you'd bailed me out, I'd still be that idiot in a stairwell crying down the phone. You basically saved me by not saving me, if that makes sense. It does, I said, more than you know. And here's where I'll ask you something. Have you ever had an apology so late you didn't know what to do with it? Did you cling to it? Or did you let it reshape the way you saw that person? I still don't have a neat answer. I just know that in that little kitchen, over a pan of pasta, something between me and my son healed in a way court orders can't touch. With Carl legally muzzled and Danny moving, however slowly, into adulthood. I was left with my own life to look at. One Tuesday, I walked into the office where I'd been a secretary for nearly 20 years and handed in my resignation. My manager blinked at the letter. "Are you sure? Margaret, you've been such a rock here." "I've been stationary," I said, with a smile that surprised both of us. "Rocks stay put. I don't want to stay put anymore." It felt indecently good. I enrolled on the master's program I'd abandoned halfway through when I married Carl, part-time, evenings and weekends, surrounded by students young enough to be my kids. Sitting in a seminar room with a notebook and a coffee, arguing about social policy or 20th century literature, I could feel parts of my brain waking up that I'd let lie dormant for years. Twice a week, I took a photography class at the Adult Education Center. I bought a secondhand camera and started pointing it at everything the river missed in the mornings. The pattern of light on my kitchen tiles, the lines on my own hands. On Friday nights, instead of counting pennies, I sat at the table with Patricia and leaflets for flights spread out between us. "You're actually going to do it," she said, eyes bright. "Proper Europe trip. Not just a long weekend in Spain with a free tote bag." "I promised myself," I said, "if I ever had enough money not to panic about the council tax, I'd go and see somewhere my father never could gamble away. Paris, Rome, Prague." Little lines in biro circling dates. The idea of boarding a plane for something other than a bank visit felt decadent, defiant. And yet, for all that, something still nagged at me. My mother's letters. Her years of pretending to be poor so I could be safe. It didn't sit right that the money she'd ring-fenced so fiercely should only ever mean balconies and better tinned tomatoes. "What if," I said to Jonathan one afternoon in his office, "we made part of the trust do more than just sit there? For other people," he raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "Single mums," I said slowly. "People starting again after men like my father. Or like Carl. Women who've been told they're bad with money when they were never the ones making the stupid decisions. Grants for education. Retraining. Something that says, you're not trapped just because someone else spent your 20s for you." "I'd do it." He sat back, thinking. "A scholarship fund," he said eventually. "Or several. Administered through the trust. Tax efficient. With clear criteria. You could focus on mature students, single parents, people returning to study after divorce. We'd need a name." I didn't have to think about that. "The Eleanor Henderson Memorial Scholarship," I said. "She deserves more than a locket and a bank file." He smiled. "We can do that." So we did. Meetings with universities and colleges. Boring forms. Criteria about income and personal statements. A little page on a website with my mother's name on it, and a short, sanitized version of her story. Eleanor believed in second chances and quiet courage. That sort of thing. The first year, we decided to fund a handful of people. Not thousands. Just enough that I could picture them, a woman my age, finally doing her nursing degree. A young dad in his 30s retraining as an electrician after a redundancy. A girl from a council estate taking on an engineering course everyone told her was a bit ambitious. Sitting at my dining table with the applications open on my laptop, I felt more like a dragon than a benefactor. Not guarding gold, but deciding where to let it flow. It was intoxicating and a little frightening, knowing I could tilt someone's life with a few clicks. Which brings us back to that file. Asterisk, asterisk, Mitchell, Daniel. His essay was rawer than I expected. Asterisk. I used to think money was magic, and my mum was the magician. Asterisk, he'd written. Asterisk. Things went wrong, and somehow there was always food. Always a roof. Always a way to wiggle out. I thought that meant money wasn't real. Just numbers adults argued about. He didn't spare himself. He wrote about pawning the necklace, my necklace, his grand's necklace, and how he'd minimized it, how he'd told himself it was just money tied up in metal. He wrote about Vegas, the stairwell, the lie about $12,000. The moment he realized I wasn't going to ride in like some overdraft fairy. Asterisk, when she said no. Asterisk, he wrote. Asterisk, I thought she'd stopped loving me. Turns out, she'd just stopped lying to both of us. I stopped there, hand over my mouth for a minute. He wrote about the months in the warehouse, the early shifts, the late ones, the way his back hurt, the way his mates still called asking him to go out, and how he'd stare at his banking app and say no, over and over, until his no muscles got stronger. Asterisk, I learned. Asterisk, he wrote. Asterisk that some debts you can't pass off as bad luck or someone else's fault. You just get up, put your boots on, and chip away at them until the weight is small enough to carry without feeling sick. Then, halfway down the page, the line that made my chest actually ache. Asterisk. I'm applying for this scholarship because I've finally understood the difference between a handout and a hand up. I don't want someone to fish for me anymore. I want help learning to fish so I can bring some home. He wanted to do a proper trade course. Plumbing, of all things. He'd attached the prospectus, the timetable, even a rough budget. He'd highlighted the bit where he'd still have to work part-time, even with the scholarship, to cover rent. At the end, in a small, neat line that couldn't have been more different from his messy texts, he'd written, asterisk, if you decide I'm not the right person for this, I'll still do it. It'll just take longer. But if you do choose me, I'll treat it like my mum's treating the money my gran left as something you look after for the next person, not something you burn through for a story. Have you ever felt so proud and so guilty in the same breath you didn't know whether to laugh or cry? That's what that essay did to me. I'd wanted revenge on Carl. I'd wanted to break the cycle. I hadn't quite let myself admit I wanted my son to be part of the after rather than a casualty of the before. The committee didn't know he was mine, obviously. The applications were anonymized when they went to the little panel Jonathan had helped me put together. But when it came back with a recommendation, strong candidate, clear evidence of growth and commitment, fits the criteria, I smiled at the screen in a way that would have terrified the version of me who used to count out change in Tesco. I clicked approve. Simple as that. No drama. Just a decision. That's the revenge nobody claps for in the comments. Isn't it? Not the court scenes or the recordings or the restraining orders. It's the choice to use money in a way your worst abusers would never understand, not as a leash, but as a lever. The last time I opened my mother's letters, I did it on the balcony of the flat she'd paid for without ever seeing. The river was high, swollen with rain, streetlights gilding the surface. I took the locket off and balanced it in my palm. The little hinge clicked as I opened it. That tiny photo of 5-year-old me, white dress, dull, eyes too serious. Looked back, asterisk. Before everything went wrong, asterisk. My mother had written, but that wasn't quite true anymore. Was it things had gone wrong? Over and over. Men had gambled and controlled and lied. I'd enabled and forgiven and shrunk myself to fit around them. But sitting there, locket open, scholarship emails pinging into my inbox. My son's provisional timetable for his plumbing course stuck to the fridge inside. I realized something. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the refusal to let other people's chaos decide the shape of my life. My grandfather buying worthless land in Colorado. My mother secretly funneling gas money into a Denver bank while pretending to be poor. Me walking into a solicitor's office and saying, I want a trust and I want him nowhere near it. Danny pressing record instead of nodding along. Each of us in our own way. quietly saying times, "It stops here." I shut the locket and put it back on. Went inside. Past the table, where my laptop sat open, on the scholarship dashboard. Past the sofa, where Danny had fallen asleep after his shift with a plumbing textbook on his chest. Into the kitchen, where a pile of washing up waited. Ordinary, really boring. Even, but built on choices my father and Carl would never have understood. You know. People always ask me if I'd forgive them. My dad, my ex, my son. I don't have a neat answer. Forgiveness isn't a checkbook you balance. But I will say this every time I approve a scholarship. Every time I log in and see Danny's grades creeping up. Every time I book a train to a new city with my camera in my bag. It feels less like I'm living in reaction to what they did and more like I'm finally living the life that little girl in the locket should have had all along. And if you've ever been controlled or used or told you're terrible with money when you were just trying to survive, I hope, in your own way, you get to that point too.